Over 1,800 leaders and representatives of social movements are gathering in Caracas, Venezuela, to celebrate the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World. The party of Armenia's Prime Minister has won the snap elections with a 54% majority. Iran's president-elect Ibrahim Raisi urged the United States to return to the nuclear deal and comply with its commitments. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Over 1,800 leaders and representatives of social movements from more than 160 countries are gathering as of Monday in Caracas, Venezuela. The event is the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World, convened in commemoration of the decisive independence battle of Carabobo, Venezuela in 1821, led by Simón Bolívar. International delegates will exchange on the integration of the Global South and the struggle for independence and sovereignty by countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Iran and others currently under attack by the United States and European imperialism. The Congress is being coordinated by the Sao Paulo Forum, an international group of left-wing and progressive Latin American parties and movements. It will meet both in presential and virtual formats from Monday, June 21st through this Thursday. New charges against former Peruvian presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori are being filed Monday by Peru's Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. During her latest presidential campaign, Fujimori violated her parole restrictions, according to the accusations. Fujimori is facing a potential 30-year jail sentence for corruption and money laundering in the case labelled Lava Jato, comprising the large-scale bribery operations of Brazil's construction giant Odebrecht. The judiciary released Fujimori on bail in May 2020. Now, prosecutor Jose Domingo Perez, member of the Lava Jato special team, says Fujimori has met with key witnesses of the case who are members of her Popular Force party, which was explicitly forbidden by her parole conditions. Fujimori is still fighting to reverse the presidential election results of June 6, in which Pedro Castillo beat her by a narrow margin. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet this Monday denounced the greatest and most serious setbacks in human rights we have ever seen. As part of a speech to the top UN human rights body, Bachelet expressed deep concern regarding the serious human rights violations during Colombia's widespread anti-government protests.
My office has expressed deep concern at allegations of serious human rights violations by state security forces. While most demonstration has been peaceful, several instances of violence have been recorded. My office condemns all forms of violence, calls for full respect for the right to peaceful assembly, and encourages dialogue to resolve the crisis. From 28th of April to 16 June, we registered allegations of 56 deaths, including 54 civilians and 2 police officers in the context of the protests, mainly in the city of Cali, as well as 49 alleged victims of sexual violence.
The blockade imposed by the United States on Cuba goes against European Union interests, an official report said Monday. The assessment rejects the extraterritorial nature of the sanctions unilaterally adopted over the past 6 decades by the United States government and Congress against the Socialist Republic in the Caribbean, extending them to any country, institution or individual trading with Cuba. The aggression has attempted unsuccessfully to bring Cuba's economy and social fabric to a collapse. The US measures against Cuba violate the rules accepted by countries for international trade, the European report says. The extraterritorial nature of the blockade is expressed, among others, by the Torricelli and Helms-Burton Acts adopted by the US Congress in the 1990s. This week, the United Nations General Assembly will vote on a draft resolution against the US blockade on Cuba, a text already overwhelmingly backed by the Assembly on 28 previous occasions. The huge impacts of the US blockade on Cuba's health system have been further accentuated amid the battle against COVID-19. The US government has maintained the cruel measures against the island instead of easing them in the midst of the pandemic. However, the Cuban government, scientists and health sector workers have successfully overcome many of the obstacles to protect the health of the population. Cuba's top epidemiologist, Dr. Francisco Duran, talks us through some of the steps taken.
Cuba, cuando empieza la pandemia, tenía 3 laboratorios de biología molecular para el diagnóstico de diferentes enfermedades. Hoy, nosotros podemos hablar de que en todas las provincias de nuestro país existe un laboratorio de biología molecular, en estos momentos dedicado al diagnóstico de la COVID. Se irán incorporando otros diagnósticos con esta misma tecnología, muy costosa en su montaje y muy costosa en su mantenimiento, porque lleva reactivos, recursos gastables que son caros, que una parte se producen en nuestro país, pero que necesariamente tenemos que importar. Y ahí es donde el bloqueo pues interfiere de manera importante, porque son recursos que tal vez comprándolo a un vecino cercano nos saldrían más económicos, pero lamentablemente esos recursos tenemos que irlos a buscar a países distantes que hacen costoso y enredado la transportación y el acceso a ellos. Si en Cuba no hubiéramos tenido bloqueo que además, no obstante la pandemia que ha afectado a todo el mundo y que por un problema humanitario era justo que se hubiera disminuido, si no se hubiera quitado, por lo menos se hubiera disminuido, pues indiscutiblemente el acceso a tecnologías, el acceso a recursos de diagnóstico, pues el acceso a medicamentos, pues hubiera sido menos costoso para nuestro país. Cuba se creció, como lo ha hecho con muchas cosas. El bloqueo también es un virus.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The party of Armenia's Prime Minister Civil Contract has won the snap elections held on Sunday with a 54% majority, according to the Electoral Commission. Armenia's acting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan called for the vote amid the crisis triggered by the country's defeat in a war with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region last year. The opposition Armenia alliance, led by former President Robert Korchakyan, is a distant second with 21%. The coalition said it would not recognise Pashinyan's victory, alleging widespread fraud. And observers from the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe said the Armenian polls were competitive and well run.
Early parliamentary elections in the Republic of Armenia, they are competitive and generally well managed with a short time frame. Voters were provided with a broad range of options, and fundamental rights and freedoms were generally respected, with contestants being able to campaign freely.
New sanctions against Belarus have been announced by the European Union in coordination with the United States, Canada and the United Kingdom. The bloc's diplomacy chief, Joseph Borrell, said European Union ministers meeting in Luxembourg on Monday discussed broad-ranging measures targeting the Belarusian economy, such as potash fertilizer exports, the tobacco industry, petroleum and petrochemical products, and the financial sector. The sanctions were grounded on the allegedly forced landing of a Ryanair passenger plane and the subsequent arrest of a neo-Nazi opposition activist who was on board. Belarus claims the plane's pilot had requested the landing and called for help due to a bomb alert message. Although an investigation is still underway, the European Union already seems to have pronounced its sentence. In Sweden, the Social Democrat Stefan Löfven became the first Prime Minister in the country's history to lose a no-confidence vote. The coalition government of Social Democrats and Greens was put to a confidence vote after the Left Party withdrew its support to Löfven over controversy on eliminating rental regulations for newly constructed buildings, promoted by the right-wing opposition. Löfven's Social Democrats had opposed the bill, but the Prime Minister softened his stance and promised to consider it. The Left Party has 27 of the Swedish Parliament's 349 seats and has supported a Social Democratic Green coalition since 2014. Löfven now has 3 months to resign or call for a fresh parliamentary vote. And Swedes reacted to the political crisis after the government was toppled.
Because before they did the vote, I wasn't expecting a lot. I didn't think this was going to go through, because it seems almost unreasonable, because there's just 1 year left until we can do a vote again.
I think people are probably not ready for a snap election at this time. But if we need to do it, we can do it, and probably that would be like, an interesting experience for us.
Iran's president-elect Ibrahim Raisi emphatically urged the United States to return to the nuclear deal and comply with its commitments. In his first press conference after winning Friday's elections, the president-elect reaffirmed Iran's stand vis-à-vis the nuclear agreement negotiations. The United States must remove sanctions and return to the deal before Iran reviews its countermeasures. He said the European Union also failed to comply with its obligations after former US President Donald Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018. Part of the so-called principalist political faction, Raisi won Friday's presidential elections, beating 3 other candidates of the reformist camp. He's pledged to bring back the lost public trust in the Iranian government. The provocations of Israeli settlers and Zionists continue, this time with marches to stop what they call illegal Arab control in an area of the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank. Settlers organised a march with a national flag in a newly built settler outpost near the Palestinian village of Beita, south of Nablus, in the occupied West Bank. Palestinians have been protesting for weeks against the expansion of the Jewish settlement. Israel retains full control over planning and construction in the zone known as Area C, but illegal settlers accuse the Israeli government of turning a blind eye to what they term illegal Palestinian building in the area. All Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories are actually illegal, according to international law. Settler protests were also held in the Hebron Hills, Binyamin and Etzion block regions of the West Bank, along with other areas. The United Nations has stressed that children can no longer be the last priority of the international agenda, nor the least protected group of individuals on the planet. According to the annual report of the Secretary-General on Children and Armed Conflict, the year 2020 was marked by a sustained and high number of grave violations. These included the recruitment and use of children in conflict, followed by the killing, maiming and incidents of denial of humanitarian access. The highest numbers of grave violations were verified in Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, the Syrian Arab Republic and Yemen. Presenting the annual report, United Nations Special Representative Virginia Gamba called for protection for Palestinian children and called for a peaceful solution in the Middle East. In South Africa, progressive organisations such as the ruling National African Congress, the South African Communist Party, the Confederation of Trade Unions, as well as associations of former South African students in Cuba joined the international action against the United States blockade of Cuba this Sunday. More in the following report by Cleva Banganali from Johannesburg.
The motorcade started with members singing revolutionary songs and being addressed by different speakers from organizations represented here. All the speakers had one common message to the world and to the United States of America. The blockade imposed on Cuba is unjust, inhumane, and should be lifted with immediate effect. The Cuban ambassador to South Africa also addressed the motorcade and thanked all parties present.
Long live international solidarity! Long live! Long live! Long live international solidarity! Long live! Long live! No more blockade! No more blockade! No more blockade! Cuba, yes! Blockade, no!
The General Secretary of COSATU, Comrade Begin Chali, has this to say about the blockade.
To show solidarity to the Cuban people, that they are not alone in their struggles to fight for the unilateral blockade by the US government. So today we are coming and showing the world that the Cuban people are not alone. They are not asking for mercy, they are not asking for donation, they are asking for the right to coexist within the international community. That's what we are here for. So we are asking the nation, progressive nations, that as they meet again on the 23rd of June in the UN, they should stand firm and say no to the unilateral blockade by the Cuban people. For over 60 years, the Cuban people have been suffering, and we think it is time that we end up this blockade. That's what we are here. We're here to show
A long convoy of cars moved to the United States Embassy with members chanting and hooting against the blockade. They moved to hand in a memorandum of demands from South Africans and the progressive movement throughout the country. The memorandum was read in front of the United States Embassy by Comrade Hope Papu, a member of the African National Executive Committee in the province of Gauteng, as well as the provincial chair of Friends of Cuba Society.
Noting that on the 23rd June 2021, an additional resolution will be again adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. We therefore, as those organizations I mentioned, demand that the US government, in compliance with the international law and the United Nations resolutions, immediately and unconditionally lift the criminal and illegal economic, commercial and financial blockade imposed against Cuba. Call on the progressive forces of South Africa and around the world, the solidarity movement, the international working class, and all fair and just people to reject the irrational and aggressive policies of the US government against Cuba and other countries of the world, such as Venezuela. We commit to continue our solidarity actions in defense of the Cuban Revolution and in rejection of the US blockade against the Cuban people. The memorandum is signed on this day, the 20th of June 2021, by the African National Congress, the South African Communist Party, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and the Friends of Cuba Society in South Africa.
As the convoy left the embassy, these organizations promised to continue with their campaign against the blockade and their unwavering support for Cuba. For teleSUR English, I am Clever Banganai, reporting live from Pretoria, South Africa.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Brazil's health minister is set to appear once again before the Senate committee investigating the national government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, as he and 13 others are now being formally investigated for negligence. Health Minister Marcelo Queiroga has already appeared before the committee several times, with senators complaining that he failed to give a straight answer to their questions. After weeks of listening to the main players, the Senate Investigative Committee announced Friday that 14 people are now being formally investigated for negligence in confronting COVID-19. Meanwhile, the population continues to mobilize to demand vaccines as well as financial support in the midst of the ongoing economic crisis. Just over 11% of the population has been fully immunized. A cemetery in Colombia reported almost double the number of cremations over a one-year period due to COVID-19 related fatalities. The privately owned Campo de Paz burial ground reflects Colombia's health crisis as a whole. The country is facing its highest coronavirus peak so far, with over 24,000 cases emerging daily since June 9th. Only in what has passed of this month, the country has seen over 25,000 fatalities.
Regarding COVID services, the increase is much higher, since in that period of time from January to May 2020, we had 4 services, while we had 246 services this year. Of course, it's really worrying because you have kids and a wife, a home, and maybe you'll take the infection home. You get worried about that. At the beginning, it was more stressful, but now we are adapting to the environment and you manage it with more calm.
The United Kingdom has seen a continuous increase in its vaccination rate, yet the government has delayed lifting all restrictions as the variant originally identified in India takes hold. More than 42.9 million people have a second dose. The number of people vaccinated in the UK accounts for over 60% of the total population. The death rate has also remained low. Meanwhile, the Conservative government announced that as the Delta coronavirus strain spreads rapidly in some parts of the country, England will postpone lifting the final phase of the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions for another 4 weeks. A plan for Africa's first COVID-19 vaccine facility using breakthrough technology has been announced by the World Health Organization, South Africa and France. The plan uses messenger ribonucleic acid, technology that has been used for the first time to make vaccines during the current coronavirus health crisis as part of the global inoculation effort. The WHO and its COVAX partners are working with a South African consortium comprising BioVac, Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, a network of universities and the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to establish its first vaccine technology transfer hub. Moderna, Pfizer and BioNTech have used this technology to make doses, which some trials have shown to be more effective than more traditionally made versions. A lack of manufacturing capacity in Africa is seen as one of the main barriers to inoculating the continent. Expressing his delight about the new facility, the Director General of the World Health Organization stated that the UN agency is in discussions with different companies and institutions to help create the state-of-the-art lab required to implement this technology.
Today, I'm delighted to announce that WHO is in discussions with a consortium of companies and institutions to establish a technology transfer hub in South Africa. The consortium involves a company called Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, which will act as the hub both by manufacturing mRNA vaccines itself and by providing training to a second manufacturer called BioVac. WHO is facilitating this effort by establishing the criteria for the technology transfer, assessing the applications, developing standards, and providing ongoing support and training. We are now in negotiations with several companies that have indicated interest in providing their mRNA technology to the hub. This selection will be based on how advanced the technology is in terms of clinical efficacy data and on the terms under which the company is willing to share its technology.
Up to 10,000 domestic fans will be allowed at Tokyo Olympic events, the Japanese government announced on Monday. The decision could be reversed if COVID-19 infections surge again. The Tokyo 2020 Summer Games were postponed last year due to the pandemic. In spite of a heated debate, Japan decided to hold the tournament this year from July 24th to August 8th.
In light of the Japanese government's restrictions on public events, the spectator limit for the Olympic Games will be set at 50% of venue capacity, up to a maximum of 10,000 people in all venues. If there should be major dramatic change in the inflation situation, we may need to revisit this matter amongst ourselves, and we may need to consider the option of having no spectators in the venues.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.